an introduction about Sharon, and then I will let Sharon give her talk to all of you, and then we can do questions at the end, if that sounds good. So without further ado, let me introduce Sharon. Sharon Rawlins is a painter and sometimes a printmaker. Born in Georgia, Sharon grew up in Maryland, went to school in Virginia, spent 30 plus years in Southern California, and now lives in Florida. Her career path took her into typesetting and from there into design and creative communication, the graphic arts. Along the way, she began painting in watercolor, studying where she could at night, privately, and at universities, art schools, and community colleges. In California, she was exposed to the California School of Watercolorists, past and present, as well as to the Bay Area figurative painters whose ideas make her think and inform her work. It was at this time that she began painting en plein air in the legendary light of Southern California. After managing an in-house creative department for many years, Sharon returned to and earned a degree in studio art from the University of Mary Washington. There she was awarded a scholarship to paint in France, which allowed her to attend a summer program at the Marchutz School in Aix-en-Provence, a transformative experience. Part of the whole experience was discovering that she liked printmaking as well as painting in oil and being exposed to ideas that shaped her in new ways. Sharon's painting medium of choice is watercolor. She likes the way the paint handles, its fluidness, and the way the transparency plays against the opaque and the happy accidents that sometimes happen along the way. In recent years, Sharon has joined programs with the Leo Marchutz School of Painting and Drawing, including museum study seminars, painting workshops in both Aix and Venice, 2 years in a row in Venice. And this summer, she will join us as an artist in residence in Aix-en-Provence. So without further ado, I will hand the floor over to Sharon.
Thank you, and hi, everybody. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my work. It was kind of a happy accident that took me to the Marchutz School in the summer of 2013. And as others have found, I too found it exhilarating and riveting and transformative. And it left me wanting to know more. Oh, you know what? I forgot to share my screen. So bear with me for a minute because I should be doing that. If I can find my cursor here. There it is. Sorry about that. So, and since I stopped myself in mid-sentence to share my screen, I also want to apologize in advance if I should start coughing. I didn't have COVID, but I do have the tail end of a sinus infection. And I'm sorry, I will have to occasionally read from my notes and refer to them, or otherwise I will digress, and this will all take just way too long. So, where was I? I think I was about to say that the experience at Marchutz left me wanting to know more, to see how it fits with where I'd been, and to shape where I'd go. And so now I am more than pleased to be a part of this community and honored to be able to share some of my journey. My time for art has been rather scattershot and hit or miss, somewhat rambling. My job was very time intensive, so I did what I could to fit in painting. I learned over and over that I didn't necessarily need a real big block of time. I could do a little bit in small blocks of time. My studio became the outdoors and sometimes over my kitchen stove. I thought when we retired and moved to Florida and built a small room addition that I would spend a lot of my days painting, but life as it does got in the way. My husband, Jim, got sick. COVID happened. Jim passed away. Even without those things, it has been much, much harder than I ever would have imagined to make painting a daily, regular habit and practice. I'm still struggling with that. Marchutz has given me over time many things to think about, and preparing for this talk is no exception. I had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to say. It wasn't until I realized that my practice really has been about practicing that I started to pull some threads, seeing where they took me, and putting this talk together. On other days, I might have picked different threads, but this is what I have now. First, in a bit of digression, I thought I would start with my mask. I was on a painting workshop in New Orleans, and the teacher suggested that we should each ask ourselves the question, what is my mask? And then paint it. Until on the night before our last day, someone asked me if I had done my mask. I hadn't thought it was a real assignment, and I was sort of horrified because I hadn't done it. We had talked about the idea that how one should ask oneself when one prepares to go to sleep at night, what do I want from my painting? And then to remember what the answer might be that came to us in our dreams. I was skeptical. But that night, in desperation, I went to sleep asking myself, what do I want my mask to be? And to my surprise, when I woke up, I knew that I had dreamed it, but I couldn't remember it. But I kept trying and trying to remember. And finally, in the shower, it came to me and I knew what it was. So I traced the outline of a regular black mask on my paper and set out in the little remaining time before critique and leaving to paint my mask. And this is the result. It has been called the New Orleans face mask and the tree spirit of the tree. But I think of it mostly as the watcher in the wood. And that is a little bit like me, at least from time to time, in that I kind of prefer to stay back and watch and listen. So right now, being kind of front and center is hard for me. In large part, my art practice has been about practicing. I took classes in watercolor, figure painting, landscape painting, life drawing, perspective, color and design, really whatever had to fit in the night at night schedule. I have most often painted from direct observation, sometimes sketches, seldom photographs, though of late I have worked from photo references. Sinks. Painting being drawn to sinks became one of the first threads I pulled. And as I thought about what to say, I realized that they in turn have elements that took me to other threads. I was in a figure painting class when I noticed these wonderful freestanding stainless steel work tables with sinks at the back of the classroom. I was really drawn to how the neutral grays of the sinks and the tables played against the colors of the scattered, always changing items on the table. I stopped being part of the figure painting class and instead started painting what I came to think of as sinkscapes. I'm not always certain about what is meant by motif, but I think it might be fair to say that sinks became a motif, something that continues to resonate for me. These are, well, I want to go back. These are, I suppose, still lifes, but they are, in fact, slices of interior spaces, and they deal with found objects. They are ordinary things of the everyday in an ordinary working space, not particularly conventionally beautiful, but in them, the ordinary has the chance to become extraordinary, just normal, everyday beauty once one begins to look and to see. After the sinkscapes, I would find sinks in other places and would resonate with them. Wherever I found them, they referenced the everyday, commonplace, yet uncommon. And these are some examples. These were sinks I found in the landscape when I was painting in Hawaii. And these next ones are sinks that I found at home. And the daffodils in the Harbingers painting are another thread. I don't live in a climate where daffodils grow, but each spring some of the markets get in daffodil stems. I can't wait for them. I buy bunches of them as many times as I can, always intending to sketch them or to paint them. And I usually manage to do one or both each year. I think of them as harbingers, signposts of things to come. Again, I'm taking the scene as it is when I come to it. Objects on the counter, they're unplanned, just as it happened I had placed them. I also did drawings of things in my sketchbook, one of which is the most recent one I did last year when I was in X. and we made a brief trip to the Chateau Noir. I remembered this sink from 2013 and kept an eye out for it and did a very quick sketch. For me, it captures the magic of being there where the ordinary becomes extra. Plein air. I was in an evening watercolor class when the teacher had to miss one and invited anyone who cared to join him for his Saturday landscape painting class. This became a main focus for me. I went to the class without the proper equipment, but there I was, my gosh, out of doors, at the beach, painting. What could possibly be better? So I asked when he thought I could be ready for this class, and he said I was ready now and could sign up for the next semester. And so I did. And I made friends. And for a long while after these classes, some of us continued to paint at different locations every Saturday, way beyond the class. I chose these paintings more or less randomly, and they're not in any particular chronological order. They were just ones that struck me at the time when I was following these different threads. Any Afternoon was done on a beach below San Clemente on the Pacific. It was done during a day in June. And the nice thing about this beach, it became a favorite spot to paint because I realized I had a 60-mile commute to work. And this beach was just shy of the halfway point on my way home. And if I was able, during daylight savings time, if I was able to actually leave work early enough and traffic cooperated, I could get to this beach. And if I didn't dawdle, I could get some painting in. And so I did that on many, many days during daylight savings time. I like old houses and their air of being from another time and the way they begin to kind of melt into their environment. This one caught my eye because of the indoor sofa, the love seat on its front porch. It dances around the interior space with the window and the indoor sofa. Watercolor workshops were my husband and my entree into what international travel we did. I went as the painter and Jim as the sightseer. One of them took us to Brittany and Normandy and to painting at Etretat. It is a fine thing indeed to be able to paint where artists have painted before me and to, in my own way, follow in their footsteps. And then, of course, there is Mont Saint-Victoire, another here I am, be here, be still my heart, place to find myself and to paint. Alan had told me that my carelessly tossed on the ground sketch said more about the place I was painting than my painting did. It gave me a newfound respect for my drawings that I usually dismissed as just scribbled sketches, and the desire to get some of whatever that is, that sensibility, into my paintings. I like to think of In the Greenhouse as a breakthrough painting. It is one I did not long after I returned from Marchutz, and I managed to take a complicated subject and get, I think, some of the simplicity of a sketch into the painting and still have it make sense. As I said, I like painting at the beach, and I actually was told that that was sort of a overly painted thing and rather pedestrian, but I was stubborn and I persisted at painting on beaches. I painted several pieces one day in August on Siesta Key in Sarasota. This was before we moved here, but this is where I now live. And August at Siesta, I think, captured something of the energy of that and the atmosphere of that day. It was a day in which in 1 minute it was sunny, and another you could see a little squall blowing through and it would rain, and then the sun would come out again. And that's why I think came to choose this painting. In a Glade Greenly is one of the first paintings, at least the first, I think, successful paintings that I did after we moved here to Sarasota. I wrestled with how to paint the tangled masses, the messes that the Florida vegetation often is, where everything is just all tangled and mixed in together. This piece was done at a place called Spanish Point. It's, I think, part of an estate where early settlers in this area lived. And I I think I wrestled with how to paint these tangled messes, and I think I managed to do that in this one. There's the sensibility of the palms and what some of the vegetation might look like. And the spot, I kind of came upon it a little bit off the beaten track on a path that suddenly opened up into a clearing where there was this statue. I got into printmaking, just before I went back to school as part of going back to school. And there is some seductive alchemy in printmaking. I often use drawings as my subject, and one might wonder why. And it is a drawing that stands on its own. What's the point of making a print of it? But somehow something happens, and the resulting print has a certain je ne sais quoi, something that makes it somehow more than the drawing was. I find that exceedingly seductive. Leaping Greenly is a watercolor monotype that I painted on location on the grounds of the Ringling Museum here in Sarasota. And again, it was printed on a press. And again, it fascinates me and amazes me how the painting itself that I painted on a piece of acetate that had been treated with gum arabic so the paint would stick to it and then release. How this okay painting that I would have been happy with if it was on a regular piece of paper, somehow through some alchemy in the printing process becomes more. It's more like it's more representative of that mixed up Florida landscape than my painting was. And to me, it's just magical how that happens. And things don't always work out the way you think they're going to. And that too just keeps you wanting to do more. Under the heading of my practice has been about practicing. I did these paintings in oil. The backyard bird bath I did after my return from Marchutz, wanting to keep my hand in after the 6 weeks I had of painting in oil there. I wanted to make sure that I did a little more. And truthfully, I didn't do a lot more, but I did do a little more. And after we moved to Sarasota, I did this painting in oil, again, keeping the practice going of a view from my backyard. Gives me a second. One of the threads I pulled relates to interiors. I was really drawn to paintings by artists I admired of interior spaces. And so I wanted to paint them too. And at one point, I had this idea that I might write an article about painting interiors and submit it to a watercolor magazine. And the watercolor magazine went out of business before I could do that. And I kind of sat the article on the back burner for a while. But some years later, when I did go back to school, I repurposed the article as an essay for an independent study I was taking or doing. And the whole idea is still on my mind. One thing when I started to write the article that came to me, that stood out for me about my favorite interiors, was how genres would overlap and echoes of one visual motif are present in another, much in the way in music you might hear echoes or elements of blues and rock or traces of folk in the classical. And I had pulled together these 3 paintings to be examples of what I'm talking about. I think you can see that in all of these: the John Singer Sargent, the breakfast table, and the Fairfield Porter, the table on the porch, and Pierre Bonnard, Norman earthenware. There's a figure in the Sargent painting, and I don't think it was intended to be a portrait. And in my mind, for better or for worse, I make a distinction between a portrait and a painting. Yes, a portrait is a painting, but a painting for me is more than a portrait. Perhaps this is a flawed thought, but for me, it keeps me on track to realize my goal, which is to make a painting more than it is to make a portrait. Teresa's table is one of the interiors I did. I've also been inspired. No, wait a second. I have a few examples here of a couple of other interiors, Home Alone, and I kind of consider El Jardin it's an outdoor interior. The My friend Teresa's patio was as much a part of her home as any inside room. And here there's still life and landscape and an almost portrait, a figure. And I realized that perhaps I could just as easily say there are landscapes that have these other elements, or there are still lifes that have these other elements. But I came to the thought when I was looking at interiors, and I don't think it really matters. For me, what I find compelling is the mixture that occurs. That's what interests me. I've also been influenced by or inspired by paintings that I've liked by artists that I admire. Carol After Dinner is one of them. It was inspired by Sargent's The Breakfast Table. And I did not intend this to be a portrait. It happens to be my sister. I just wanted it to be a painting about a girl sitting at a table after dinner. My sister was kind enough to pose for me prior to when I did this painting. And I was able to do some pen and ink drawings. And I did use a photo reference. And I oftentimes, when I was learning about printmaking, I would repurpose um, drawings or paintings to turn into prints. So this is an Intalia dry point a la Poupée along the same lines. My husband, Jim, needed to be very still it was his way of coping with pain in the last several months before he passed away. And it was a familiar sight. And it was actually a familiar sight before that, too, as this was his favorite chair. And it spoke to me. And so I managed to do a painting. It strikes me now that I look at it, I could just as well have named it Still Life, I guess, as well as Holding Still. I did use photo references. I think I did some sketching. I was able to run back from my studio to do some reality checks every now and again. And I'm pretty sure I did the vase of flowers from life. It's a little hard for me to remember some of the details. Some of that time frame, as time tends to be anyway, is a bit of a blur. Man with a Cat, or Jim and Smokey, was a painting I had long wanted to do. It was inspired by Man with a Cat by Cecilia Beau, one of my favorite paintings. I think it's absolutely marvelous. I took multiple photos of Jim. He was not all that excited about sitting for me, but he did. And I have to say, the cat was even less enthralled with the idea. And I took a bunch of photos of Jim in this particular wingback chair that was in our house in California before we left. And finally, here in Sarasota, several years ago, I got around to painting this. And while, again, I think of these as paintings, not portraits, this one actually has an extra added bonus because it's a fairly good, it resembles Jim. Sometimes the sunset. Um, my sister and her husband have a place on the Rappahannock River in Virginia. It is a wonderful spot. Somehow it is a place that transcends relaxation and just allows one to just be. It's quite wonderful. Tim said to Carol when they decided that they wanted to become what they thought of as river people, at least on the weekends and other times, that he gave her a sunset when they set out to find where they wanted to, to have this property, having that sunset across the way for them from them across the river was very important. So the title, Sometimes the Sunset, comes a little bit from what he said, which I thought was really romantic. Apparently, he said, I gave you a sunset. And it perhaps comes even more from a quote I came across that goes, remember, sometimes the sunset is enough to fix a lousy day. Author unknown. Charita and Katita is another painting inspired by Cecilia Bell and her painting, Sita e Sarita. It's a wonderful painting of a small kitten standing on long legs with its long tail on her shoulder, and somehow all of their eyes in her painting add a line, and it's a beautiful painting. And one day I was sitting out on the sofa on my lanai, and my big orange cat, Monsieur Beaularange, jumped up behind me and started walking back and forth. And when he settled down, I was reminded of that painting. So I took out my iPhone and I started taking photos as he moved around. I could never align our eyes, and he's a big cat. And at any rate, I set out to make this painting um, with that painting in mind. And I think I was being a little cute with the name Charita and Catita. I like to think that it's Spanish, diminutive for Sharon and diminutive for a cat, though Monsieur Beaularange is not at all diminutive. Last fall, Hurricane Idalia came through Sarasota. And on the following day, the day after, it was still full of squalls and burst of rain, and it was windy, and there was hints of the light that wanted to shine through. And I was out on my lanai again and then looking out, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's a painting. And so I managed to set up and I did this painting. Mostly, and what caught me was this wonderful light that just wanted to come through and made it every now and again. And I think of this painting as well as in the greenhouse as kind of a breakthrough painting for me, because I think it says what it needed to, what I wanted it to, without saying a lot. This spring, I was able to see my way clear to go to Venice with Alan and the painting trip, and I'd managed the same thing the year before. And these next two paintings are two of the paintings I think that were the more successful of my work. I had looked at books about Whistler and about Turner before I left, and I was struck by how many Venice paintings Whistler had done that were really long horizontal views from a distance of I guess, the skylines of Venice. And I was, of course, awed by Turner's ability to capture, by massing paint and suggestive strokes, a sense of Venice. And I like to think that here I am finding some of my motifs, those spots that I consistently want to go back to and paint from. And Last Light is one of those motifs. The old buildings of the ancient, showing signs of the ages, yet somehow timeless city that is Venice, and the glimpse or the view of the industrial area wholly of today that's beyond. And I've painted before this green building here on the Zaatari, but this time I painted from Giudecca. And I had in my mind, I think, as I was painting it, the hope that I could somehow make a connection between the sky and the water and make it all of a whole with the buildings and the scene beyond. I was thinking similar things when I did this view of San Giorgio from Giardini. And I realized too that this had become another of my motifs because the previous year I had also painted from a similar spot in the Giardini, Venice from a distance. These next two paintings are just paintings that were of favorite things and that I have done in the last several years. Nighttime Daffodils is that daffodil motif that captures me. And the zinnias are just flowers that I like. And for my own pleasure, I had picked some that I had somehow managed to grow. I'm not a gardener, don't have a green thumb, but I managed to grow some zinnias. So I picked them and brought them in to enjoy and was moved to set up and do this painting. And in both of these, I was trying to do a background that wouldn't, a background that was simultaneously there and not there. So it didn't interfere with the main elements, but it was also something that maybe meant something. When I went back to school, I lived with my sister. I had another 60-mile commute because she lives in Richmond, but I knew I could do it. And one day I happened to walk by her bedroom door where she had fallen asleep. And I thought, that's a painting I want to do. I knew I couldn't set up without waking everybody up. So as quickly as I could and surreptitiously, I took a photo. And you can see that the cat was intensely aware of my intrusion. And I took that photo some 10 years ago and painted it just a couple of years back now. And the one, Lisa T. After Work, it's another one that I was on a business trip. We were staying in a chateau somewhere northwest of Paris, I think. And after work, my colleague Lisa, we were in a charming little clubby lounge and she was relaxing. And I looked at her and I thought, that's a Sargent painting. And I photographed it thinking maybe someday I might paint it. And truthfully, I kind of forgot about it. But I came across the photo not that long ago and decided that I would see what I could do to make a painting of this subject too. Somewhere along the line, at some point, I had the idea that I would do a series of booklets called Grace Notes. And so far I have done 3: Finding Beauty, Indicated Realities, and Looking at Nature. Finding Beauty is really a selection of watercolor landscape paintings done on plein air. And I searched out various quotes or fragments of poems that I thought worked well with the paintings, and I put this book together. And then Indicated Realities. When I went off to Marchutz in 2013, I took with me some litho plates. I had learned a process called polyester plate lithography. And the plates themselves aren't much more substantial than a piece of printer paper. So I had interleaved some of them into a sketchbook and gone with the intent that I would also, in addition to whatever else I might find myself doing, I would also do some sketching that on these plates that I could take back and print on my return. And it can be a rather tricky process that I hadn't really mastered. You could use a Bic pen or a lithographic crayon because those two worked with the idea of water and oil not mixing. And a more likely to succeed method of getting the image onto the plate was to photograph what you had done and then output it onto the plate only using a laser printer, because something about whatever prints from a laser printer also is a medium that works on that principle of oil and water not mixing. So I made sure I photographed everything as a fail-safe. And once I got to Marchutz and I saw for the first time, because I didn't know anything, the lithos that Leo Marchutz had done, I was kind of overwhelmed by the way he had infused color into his lines. And I understood it to be that he printed his he did his prints on a single pass. And so when I got back, I wanted to do that too. And I found some very narrow rollers that I managed to roll out my inks and do something that approximated the kinds of things that he was doing. And I put this little book together. Some of them I did in X. The one that you can kind of make out on the cover is called Looking at Whistler. And I did that on the way home. I had stopped through the Tate Museum in London. And I also did some pieces that are in this book in California. And then the latest one, which is a few years back now, I called Looking at Nature. And it goes back to, again, plein air painting, some in watercolor, some in oil. And I kind of have some others in my mind that I'd like to do. I started out thinking about doing these as a way of sharing my work with people that might not otherwise have an opportunity to see it, since I wasn't showing any place or anything like that. And I thought that it would make a good gift to give to someone who might buy a painting. And it happened that occasionally somebody did. And I gave them one of these. And I also just thought of them as gifts to my family, so they might, and friends, so that they might see or get a sense of what I was doing. And now I think of them, I think more in terms of posterity, as a way of archiving for the future some of the things that I've done during my lifetime. I wanted to share these two pieces that I think of as my family portraits. We were invited to a baby shower, and we were instructed to bring baby photos of ourselves. And to my surprise, my husband and I, who had always had cats because we really liked cats, we both, at a time long before we knew anything at all about each other, we both had photos of ourselves as toddlers with cats. So I did this watercolor monotype of Jim and this painting of me. And when we drove across country the first time to bring my car here, when we moved from California, I made sure we had these two paintings so that they were at hand when we were ready to hang them and weren't packed away. The last painting or piece I wanted to save is this one, really solely because it's my absolute favorite thing that I've done in the past several years. I don't really know why. It's a hand painted, because I no longer have access to a press, watercolor monotype. I printed it by hand using some Japanese barons I had come across. And I think that because it wasn't run through a press, it's less crisp and the colors are probably a little less vibrant. But there's just something about the sense of light in that painting that I don't want to stop looking at. So I finally had it framed and I have it here in my house. And so I hope I haven't gone on too long. In conclusion, I wanted to say that it has been really interesting and even informative for me to see in this process of putting this together, that even though there's a randomness to my path and work, there are in fact links and threads and motifs running through it all. So even doing this, I'm learning something from Marchutz. And I have to say that I can't express in words how grateful I am to be a part of this community. And thank you all for listening. And if there are questions or you want to see anything else, and if I haven't gone on way too long, I'm happy to share.
Oh, Sharon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Rose's internet went out, so she's
Oh
trying to get,
no.
I know. She just texted me, she's trying to get back on the meeting. So
That was
unfortunately,
my nightmare, that mine would go out.
I know. So I'm gonna be the Rose voice, not as good as Rose, but she's trying to get back on. So, first of all, beautiful, Sharon. God, that was like a long poem. Just lovely, incredible. So, I'll just open it up to you guys out there for questions or comments. See where we go. Who wants to go first?
Buddy, my internet cut out there for a
Oh, there
minute.
you
So,
go. Oh, I feel
yes,
better
I'm
already.
so sorry. My internet
All
just
right.
totally went out, kicked me off of the meeting. So, apologies if I'm glitchy or slow or anything. But thank you so much, Sharon. That was so beautiful. It's so nice to see all your work all together and just see how you've made such good time for your painting practice over the years, even in a busy career and different phases of life. It's so inspirational. Um, I'm so curious about, I'll start with the first question while people are still thinking. Um, I am so curious about how you approach your process in your different mediums. Do you feel like you have one sort of way of looking or thinking about how you're going to compose your work when you're working in watercolor versus oil versus preparing for a print, a monotype or whatever type of printmaking you're doing? Do you approach the tools or the mediums differently um, as you go
Maybe
about it?
maybe sometimes I'm not entirely sure. I have, especially when I'm doing plein air watercolor painting, sometimes it depends on what I was hoping to achieve. Sometimes I have something um, where in classes that I took out here or out there in California, there was a lot of talk about composition and the golden section, and it seemed like I was never quite getting it. So sometimes I would sketch out faint little grid marks on my paper and to kind of get this proportion and make sure I put something on the golden section and then try to paint it. I also had little quirks, I guess, or things. I always had a hat that I wanted to wear, and I had certain painting clothes that I thought, put me in that frame of mind. And I for watercolor, and I guess I'm surprised that I didn't find it quite as hard, at least this year, with the oil painting. For watercolor, I find it really, really difficult to paint to a page size. And I usually paint on large sheets, 22 by 30. I mean, I don't paint on them. I get 22 by 30 sheets of watercolor paper. And I like the 90-pound weight because it has a kind of a a vintage quality to it. And I just like the results better than on the heavier papers. And I cut them down usually to half sheets, like 15 by 22, or quarter sheets, 11 by 15. But I find it really hard to paint end to end. So a lot of times I just kind of start out somewhere in the middle and start painting until I have achieved what I wanted. And I get more successful paintings that way, but it's also more expensive to frame because they're not any consistent size where I can repurpose a frame. And so that's the downside. But when I was doing the oil painting on the boards, I sometimes, when I had done a sketch that was clearly going to be a kind of a narrow painting, I would tape off the board. But I didn't have as much trouble painting from whatever edge to edge there was. And then with the really interesting thing that I had a choice when I went back to school. I was kind of trying to hedge my bets of what would be required of me. And I kind of had the impression that I needed a sculpture class and I needed a printmaking class. And I petitioned and signed up for both classes at Cal State Long Beach. And at the 11th hour, I actually went to the first day of each class. I got an email from Mary Washington saying, take the printmaking class. The sculpture isn't going to transfer. So I took the printmaking class. And I was surprised at how much more of a process printmaking is than painting. With painting, I mean, with oil painting, I should backtrack a little bit and say with watercolor painting, I mix on the fly. But with oil painting, I learned through the teachings at Marchutz to gather my thoughts about what colors I might be wanting to have for my painting. So I spend a lot of time, sometimes too much time in terms of what's left for time for me to paint, mixing color. And that's a little bit, I guess, more of a process. And then with printmaking, it's very process intensive in that if I was doing dry point, I had to figure, or I used copper plates and both plexiglass. And I also went to using crescent board that had been, I guess, shellacked is a catch-all word that will do. And so it was time consuming to create the plate. And then it was incredibly time consuming to ink the plate. And then once you got the ink down, especially with, no, I don't know that I wanted to say that. Once you got the ink down, then you had to wipe the plate. And that was time consuming. And then after you did all of that, you set up the press and you arranged you had soaked your paper in advance and blotted it up and gotten everything ready on the press. And, it was, oh my gosh, it's drum roll. It's time to see what this is. And you'd roll it through the press and you'd have really no idea. It was always a surprise to me. I guess if you do it long enough, you have a pretty good idea of what to expect, but it was always a surprise to me what turned out. And it always made me wanting to do more. I would look at it and I would think, oh my gosh, look what that did. I bet if I did this and I inked it that way, it would do this the next time. So that was incredibly, I guess, seductive is a good word. I know I've used it before. And in the dry point, especially, the use of plate tone I liked because Whistler did that a lot and others, where you leave behind some of the ink on the paper, which then acts as part of the print. And I learned about this thing they called a la poupée, which has something to do with little doll. And you would wrap a piece of something on your finger and you could dab it into paint and then dab it onto your print. And I got very entranced by that. If I wasn't careful, I would almost have, I guess, it would become a monotype maybe in a way, in that the permanent part, the repeatable part would be the dry point, and the changing part would be whatever I did with the ink. And then the watercolor monotypes are a process as well, because it's the same thing with having to prepare the paper. And I really like paper, even the watercolor papers. I use a variety. I'll take a variety out with me and I'll pick whichever one feels right for that particular day. And the same with printmaking papers. And there was a place for a long while called New York Central Art Supply, and they stocked these incredible papers from around the world. And I would buy these sight unseen, not knowing what I was going to get because I was ordering from California or Virginia, these Japanese or Gampi papers. And they're very interesting to see how different things print on different papers. And with the monotypes, I'd have to prepare whatever the surface I was going to use was. With something like gum arabic, could actually use soap in the water. And one day I wanted to do a print when I was out on location, and I forgot to bring anything for preparing the plate. But I had, long before COVID, my husband had sent me out often making sure I had hand sanitizer, and I squirted that in my water, and that worked. And so I think I'm losing my train of thought. Does that kind of answer your question?
Definitely. It's so cool to hear about the different processes and where the preparation comes in, because it sounds like watercolor is sort of more maybe spontaneous or something, and then everything else has different lead up times, but I guess all of it is part of the process in one way or another. Thank you. Other questions for Sharon or comments? Paul, yeah, go ahead. You'll just have to unmute yourself.
I guess a comment and a question. I'm struck as I looked at your body of work that went by the power of your interiors and so much richness and just little flowers in the background and just and a sense of design in the compositions. Lovely. And then I was struck by how much the Mont Saint Victoire painting that you showed felt like an interior. And that was a real paradox for me because being out there on that mountain, that is a honking motif. And you had this sense of it was just a small, it felt very much contained in your painting. And so wow, that's a fantastic vision. I hadn't thought of before when thinking about the Mont Saint Victoire. My question, that was my observation. My question is, what is your watercolor process? How do you paint the lights first? How do you approach it? Do you throw down some sketches on pencil first and then bring in color? Do you crash in? How do you approach that?
Most of the time, I do some semblance of a sketch on my paper. It's not, if ever, really detailed, but it's there so that I know where I'm going with things. And I do pretty much work from light to dark, kind of the whole idea that with watercolor, you have to save the whites and use the white of the paper. And sometimes I lose the white of the paper. I like to put down preliminary, very light washes that kind of cover the whole page. The whole page gets wet, and it lets one work the whole page without it. I don't work on blocks. I know a lot of people work on watercolor blocks, and I work on loose sheets of paper that I have these banker's clips that look like this, that I just clip it on in a couple of places to a piece of foam core because foam core is lightweight and yet it doesn't really buckle for me. And so I kind of quickly cover the page, trying to save the whites that I know I want to save with light washes of different colors. And I don't very often use anything like masket or tape to hide places to save the whites. I have experimented and tried to do that, to do something with like wax candles. But gosh, that is so easy you can't really see what you're doing with the wax candle. And while sergeants seem to do just fine with it, when I do it, I get these incredibly clumsy looking areas, or at least they horrify me. And so I haven't used that approach that often, but I try it from time to time. And sometimes one can scrape a little bit out or lift a little bit out if you want to lighten an area. But I think for a long time I said that I had fear of hard edges. So I would put down a dark, it doesn't even have to be dark, distinct wash with a hard edge and immediately go into a tailspin and rub it all out. And so I had to learn to get past that fear of hard edges, which I think shows up in my oil paintings too. And I struggled for a long time with getting dark enough values. I think I still struggle with that. And a digression that I can make from, if you don't mind, from your question is, I came home with this idea that Cezanne said that the colors, the values were colors. The colors stood for values. and the light of the paper was the light. And for the longest time, until I think it was the museum study trip in Philadelphia, I could not get past, okay, so the white of the paper is the light and the colors are the values. But what on earth are the lights? Until it suddenly struck me that, wait a minute, values go from light to dark. So what have I been missing all these years? It was just this complete I was just completely missing because I was so hung up over values, and I had to work on my dark values that I never stopped to consider that values go from very light to very dark. And that's what was meant by that. Does that help answer your question at all?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful.
Sharon,
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
could you put up that last painting that you said was your favorite painting?
I think so. Just a second.
So, yeah, my question is, I know you said you didn't know why, but can you talk a little bit about why you like this painting so much? Because in terms of everything that I feel like I'm sort of interested in how you pick a motif or what you're sort of working on in different paintings that you do. Sometimes you're doing a painting that's sort of more documentary. It's not documentary, but you're doing a painting of a friend, or you're doing a painting of your husband, and the subject matter is really, really, really important. And then sometimes it seems like you're interested in the subject matter, but there's something else that you're interested in besides just the subject matter. Does that make sense? What I'm asking in terms of how you choose your motif. And in terms of this painting, what it is, can you talk a little bit? I know you said you couldn't, but can you talk about why this is your favorite painting? Because I'm
Well,
saying this, I think there's something in this painting because you keep talking about Sargent, and I love, Sargent's incredible, but I feel like in this painting and in some of your other paintings, you go actually further than Sargent in terms of the expression of a whole sort of interior form. That I find this painting right here actually stronger than a lot of Sargent's.
wow,
But
thank you. Thank you.
does that make sense in terms of um, how
Well,
you?
it might. I do I have a couple of what I think of as loose series, I guess. One of them I touched on in this talk was the whole thing about daffodils.
Mhm.
And I have another loose series. I saw some work by an artist. I think her name is Wendy Artinen, maybe. And she does these wonderful kind of washy watercolor paintings of just objects. It might be an eggplant or a flower or whatever. And I started thinking that I wanted to do paintings of just objects. And some of them that I've done have just essentially been on a white sheet of paper, kind of centered with the merest suggestion of a surface. And this isn't really that, but I think this drawing, and the reason I chose it to try to make a print of, is because it was an object in a way. It was this blue glass and these daffodils. And I had done this drawing of it that I was really pleased with. And it's something about I think it's something about the light in this particular painting that
Mm.
makes me really like it, aside from just the fact that it turned out. I, I don't know.
Yeah, I really think it turned out, and I don't. When I look at this painting, I don't think that much about, oh, this is the painting of objects. I see much more of your vision and your, particular way of seeing, in the strokes and how they translate your eye. I find it to be really beautiful in that sense. I don't sort of see it, oh, this is just a picture of a pot and flowers. It's got a
Well,
beautiful fullness to it.
and
And the,
truthfully, I don't intend for it to be just an image of a pot of flowers or a glass of
yeah.
flowers.
Mhm.
But it's my starting point. And I hope that I
Sure.
bring more to it than just another painting of a glass with flowers in it. I hope there's more to it than that. And I
Yeah,
don't necessarily know how it happens, but I'm grateful when it does.
yes. Mhm. Beautiful, Sharon. Those
Thank
three
you.
little
Thank
dots
you.
of red are just incredible in that painting in relation to everything. Yeah.
Beautiful.
That's one of the things that awes me about how you and others can look at a painting and see a stroke here or a color there that harmonizes with something else elsewhere in the painting. And I have found that when I'm painting anymore, at some point, I stop paying attention to the underlying drawing or the scene that I'm looking at, and I'm paying more attention to what does the painting itself need, what's
Mhm.
Mhm.
called for in the painting. So maybe I'll get there someday.
And I thought it's really related what's happening here to even some of the paintings that Paul was talking about, the interiors. I don't know if you can go back. There was an incredible interior of just a bed. I think it was an empty bed. Maybe there was a cat in it. I can't, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did I go past it?
no, all of those are really, yeah, that right there, the one on the left. Is that a dog or a cat? Yeah.
Oh, I think it was supposed to be a cat.
Yeah.
It was from my imagination more than anything. And
So is that painting from your imagination or from a photo?
no, I did that painting from life.
Oh, from life. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the room doesn't exist as it is there anymore. But this was my parents' bedroom in the house where I now live.
Wow.
And they did not have a cat, but I added the cat. And
Beautiful, Sharon.
and one of the things that I like about this painting is that over in here, there's a flickering sketchiness that I managed to, I put it down in that light pencil there, but I managed to hold on to it when I painted it, which isn't always the case. And so that I think then set up the light that flickers throughout the painting. And then this hint of this overhead fan was kind of an afterthought because it seemed to me that it needed something. And the fan does exist. I just had ignored it. And
Beautiful.
I hadn't thought of the don't know where it is now. I hadn't thought of the Montagne Saint Victoire as having that sense that Paul spoke about. I think I did this one from a distance along the side of the road, not far from the school, looking through all the brush. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to remember.
Beautiful. Any last questions for Sharon before we wrap things up? It's so nice to see familiar face on your Charlotte. Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you, Sharon. This is fantastic, and
Mhm.
I'm going to listen over and over again. And
Oh,
all
thank you.
wonderful to see people from Venice and Grace and Rose, your face, and it just
Oh,
brings tears to my eyes.
I
so
realize I
sweet.
don't even know who all is here, but I want to say hello and thank you very much for coming out to listen.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Let's give Sharon a little virtual round of applause. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining today. And Sharon is one of our best, along with Barry down there, one of our best attendees of these monthly artist talks. So it was about time that you gave one, Sharon. So thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you all for bearing with me on my internet problems and my sick voice. I really appreciate all of that. And thank you, Sharon. This was just so beautiful. And I can't wait to see you soon in a couple weeks in X.
I know when I realized it was in the homestay note, it said something about 2 weeks, and I thought, oh no, it's a lot longer away than 2 weeks. It's like, oh my God, 2 weeks.
That made
Am
my
I
heart
ready for
go
this?
a little fast too.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Exactly. I know.
It's like, surely they don't mean 2 weeks. And but now that I'm past this, maybe I had obligated myself for several projects. I do some book design on the side, and it's like, oh gosh, what have I done? Anyway, I'm really looking forward to being in X
You are
again.
too.
So are
So
we. It'll be so
thank
great.
you all.
Thank you,
Bye,
Sharon, and thank
everybody.
you all
Thanks
of
for
you.
joining.
Nice to
Much
see you
love
all.
you. Thanks so much,
Bye
Sharon.
bye.
Oh, lovely. Talk to you all soon. Take care.